All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're looking at Mexican employment law.
Specifically, how a treaty called CEDAW is actually impacting workplaces.
CEDAW, that's the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, right?
That's it.
Mexico signed on to this back in 1981.
Yeah, they've ratified it in 81, and it's not just symbolic, it's actually integrated into Mexican law.
Okay, so for companies operating in Mexico, this isn't just like a feel-good international agreement. This has real legal
Oh,
implications.
absolutely, it has teeth. Imagine, you're a manager in Mexico.
Right.
The Mexican Constitution itself
Okay.
guarantees equal rights, right? So if you find out, say, a female employee is making less
Hmm.
than her male counterpart for the same job, well,
You've got a problem.
you've got a legal issue.
Well, so the Constitution lays the groundwork, but are there specific laws that, really spell this out?
Yes, so Mexico's federal labor law, they call it the LFT,
Okay.
gets into the details. Equal pay, protection for pregnant workers, even makes sexual harassment a fireable offense. We're not talking vague guidelines here.
No kidding.
This is enforceable stuff.
So if companies don't comply, what are we talking about? What are the consequences?
Inspections, fines, even lawsuits, it can get pretty messy.
Yeah, I can imagine. But is it all about just avoiding penalties, or could there actually be some advantages for businesses that embrace these changes?
That's what's really interesting. More and more companies are finding that aligning with CEDAW
Okay.
isn't just about compliance, it's good business.
So it's not just a stick, but a carrot too. Tell me more about that.
Well, think about it. A company with a reputation for fairness
Yeah.
attracts better talent.
Right.
It can be a selling point to clients or investors who care about social responsibility.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So what are some practical steps companies are taking to make sure they're following CEDAW and Mexican law?
One big one is equality audits.
Okay.
Really digging deep into the company's practices, looking for hidden biases, pay gaps, things like that.
Like shining a light in all the corners.
Exactly. You got to find the problem to fix it, right?
Right.
And then you need really strong systems for handling harassment and discrimination.
Makes sense.
Clear reporting mechanisms,
Okay.
ideally anonymous ones, and training for everyone, from the CEO down.
I would think family-friendly policies would be a big part of this too.
Oh, absolutely. Flexible schedules, remote work, childcare support. These are becoming more common, especially in companies who are serious about this.
Uh-huh.
In fact, Mexico has a whole certification. It's called the NMXR 025 SCFI 2015.
Wow, a whole certification focused on labor equality. What does that entail?
It's pretty rigorous. You have to go way beyond just checking boxes. You need to show a real commitment to change.
Like, I'm guessing if a company says they have a zero-tolerance harassment policy, but they don't actually investigate complaints?
No, they wouldn't qualify.
Right, right.
It's a deep dive. They look at hiring, promotions, making sure there's no gender bias there. They look at compensation. Are men and women being paid equally for equal work?
And what about things like work-life balance? Are those factored in?
Absolutely. Things like flexible work arrangements, parental leave, childcare support.
Got it.
They're looking for that holistic commitment.
So this certification, this is pretty high stakes for companies in Mexico.
It is.
We talked about reputation, but are there other concrete benefits, like to their bottom line?
Well, for one thing, it can give you a competitive advantage. A lot of organizations now
Right.
really prioritize working with companies who have a good track record on gender equality.
Yeah.
It can even help with things like bidding for government contracts.
Wow, so it can actually improve their financial performance
It can.
and attract better employees, I imagine.
Absolutely. When people see a company taking gender equality seriously,
Right.
they're more likely to want to work there.
So this NMXR 025 SCFI 2015 certification, it's a pretty powerful tool.
It is.
But I'm wondering, are there any potential downsides or challenges associated with it?
Well, one challenge can be the cost
Right.
and the resources needed to get and maintain the certification.
So for smaller businesses, it might be a barrier.
It can be, yeah.
Are there any other concerns with the certification process itself?
Some people argue that it can get overly bureaucratic,
Okay.
focusing too much on paperwork, maybe not enough on actual change.
Right, so it's like, are they really changing the culture or just ticking boxes?
That's a valid concern.
Yeah.
But the process does include on-site audits, interviews,
Right.
to make sure they're actually walking the walk.
So there's real scrutiny involved,
There is.
not just taking their word for it.
Right, and even if there are imperfections, the certification itself
Right.
is a good step. It shows a commitment to going beyond the bare minimum.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's about progress, not perfection. And speaking of progress, looking at our source material here,
Okay.
some companies are really going above and beyond just basic compliance with CEDAW.
Oh, that's great to hear.
Yeah, they're taking some pretty innovative approaches, especially to the gender pay gap.
I'd love to hear about that. What are some of these creative strategies?
Well, some companies are proactively analyzing their pay practices
Okay.
to make sure everyone's being paid fairly. They're not waiting for complaints or audits.
That's impressive. That takes a real commitment to transparency
It does.
to do that kind of analysis voluntarily.
And it's not just about pay equity. Some companies are providing leadership training specifically for women,
That's fantastic.
recognizing they might need extra support to break through those glass ceilings.
Right. It's not just about leveling the playing field.
Uh-huh.
It's about giving them the tools to rise to leadership positions.
Absolutely. And it's not just big corporations. We found examples of smaller businesses, even startups,
Oh, wow.
implementing things like on-site childcare, flexible schedules that actually work,
That's encouraging.
and generous parental leave for both mothers and fathers.
It seems like there's a real shift happening where companies are recognizing the importance of work-life balance for everyone.
Right. It's not just a women's issue.
Exactly.
It's a human issue.
And here's something really interesting. Some companies are taking it even further.
Okay.
They're promoting gender equality within their whole supply chain.
Their supply chain. So they're requiring their suppliers to meet certain standards too.
Exactly.
Wow. That's pretty powerful. It's like using their influence to create change across the whole industry.
It is.
This is inspiring stuff. It shows that CEDAW and this legal framework in Mexico
Yeah,
aren't just creating a baseline.
right.
They're inspiring real innovation.
Absolutely. When companies go beyond just the letter of the law
Mm.
and really embrace the spirit of equality,
Yeah,
it unlocks all kinds of potential for the business and for society as a whole.
that's a great point. Now, we've been focusing on the positive developments,
Right.
but I think we need to acknowledge that there are still challenges, places where progress is lagging.
Of course, there's always more work to be done.
What are some of the key challenges that you see?
Mm.
Well, one that keeps coming up is the underrepresentation of women in leadership positions,
Yeah.
especially at the highest levels. We're seeing some gains,
Mm-hmm.
but those C-suites and boardrooms, they're still mostly men.
That's a crucial point. It's not just about getting women in the door.
Right.
It's about making sure they have equal opportunities to advance and lead.
And it's not just about the numbers.
Yeah.
It's about changing the culture.
Right.
So it's more inclusive and supportive of women's leadership styles.
There can be unconscious biases,
Yeah.
deeply ingrained cultural norms that hold women back.
Another challenge that came up in our research
Uh,
is the problem of harassment and violence against women in the workplace.
Yeah.
Mexico has strong laws, but enforcement isn't always consistent.
That's a tough one.
And a lot of these incidents, they go unreported or unaddressed.
It's heartbreaking.
It is.
But it's not surprising these issues run deep,
Uh,
and they're often just ignored. It takes a real shift in attitudes and behaviors.
And better reporting system.
Yeah,
And real accountability.
absolutely. And it's important to remember that all these challenges, they're interconnected.
They are.
When women aren't represented in leadership,
Right.
they have less power to make change,
Exactly.
which makes it harder to address things like harassment and discrimination.
That's such an important point. You have to take a holistic approach,
Yes.
address the individual behaviors, but also the systemic barriers.
This brings up a question I think is really important for our listeners.
Okay.
What role can individual companies play
Mm,
in addressing these bigger societal challenges?
that's a great question. And it's easy to get focused on just your own company,
Right.
compliance and your internal policies.
Right. So it's not enough to just get your own house in order.
But companies need to think bigger.
Okay.
What's their role in driving change outside their own walls?
They have a responsibility.
They do. To use their influence and their resources
Absolutely.
to advocate for greater equality and justice in the wider world.
They can support organizations that are working to empower women,
Yeah.
promote education and awareness,
Right.
advocate for policy changes that create a level playing field.
And it's not just altruism, right?
No.
It's a good business sense.
When societies are more just, everyone benefits, businesses included.
Absolutely. So by supporting gender equality,
Yeah.
companies are investing in a better future for everyone.
I couldn't agree more. Now, before we wrap up this part,
Okay.
I want to leave you with something to think about.
Right.
We've talked a lot about Mexico,
Mm.
but I'm curious, What are some other creative approaches companies are taking around the world?
To promote gender equality, you mean?
Yeah. What are some of those initiatives that go beyond what we've talked about already?
That's a great question, and it's one we're going to explore in our next segment.
Yeah.
Exactly. In part two, we're going to look at some inspiring examples of companies that are really going above and beyond
I can't wait.
to create workplaces where everyone can thrive.
Me neither.
So stay with us.
Welcome back to our deep dive. Last time, we asked you to think about some creative approaches to gender equality.
And we found some amazing examples.
Seriously inspiring stuff.
So are you ready to be inspired?
I am. Let's do it.
All right, let's start with mentorship programs.
Yeah, those are key.
We all know mentors are important, but some companies are taking this to a whole new level.
How so?
They're creating formal programs specifically for women
Oh, that's interesting.
to connect them with, senior leaders in the company.
So it's not just about giving advice, it's about
Yeah, opening doors,
creating opportunity.
helping them navigate, the corporate world.
It's like having someone in your corner, someone who's invested in your success.
Right, like a sponsor, almost.
And the data shows it works. Companies with these programs, they often see a big jump in female leadership.
Makes sense. Now, what about unconscious bias? That's a tough one to tackle, right?
It is, but one effective approach is unconscious bias training.
So you're talking about helping employees recognize their own biases
Exactly.
and giving them the tools to, check themselves before they make a decision.
Right, making sure bias isn't creeping in.
And some companies are getting even more creative. They're using technology to combat bias.
Really?
AI.
Wow, AI for gender equality?
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
What are they doing with it?
Well, there are tools that can analyze job descriptions,
Okay.
hiring practices, even interview feedback.
To identify potential bias?
Yeah, it can help remove gendered language from job postings, make sure a diverse pool of candidates is considered.
That's amazing.
So yeah, technology can actually be a force for good here.
It's not perfect, of course,
Right.
but it can really help us identify and mitigate bias in ways that, we humans might miss.
We've talked about mentorship, unconscious bias training, AI.
Right.
But I'm curious, what about companies going beyond their own walls?
Engaging with the community.
Exactly. Are there examples of that?
Oh, tons. For example, some companies actively support women-owned businesses.
Oh, how do they do that?
They prioritize them in their supply chains,
Uh-huh.
provide access to capital, mentorship,
So they're using their influence to help these businesses succeed.
Exactly. And it creates this ripple effect.
It's not just about what happens within the company.
Right.
It's about using their power to create change out in the world.
And some companies are going even further. They're investing in education and training programs specifically for women
Oh,
to help them get into those traditionally male-dominated fields.
So they're building a pipeline of talent.
Yeah, and breaking down those gender barriers from the ground up.
So they're realizing that empowering women isn't just, the right thing to do.
Right.
It's smart business.
When you empower women, you empower whole communities.
Yeah.
And ultimately, you create a stronger, more vibrant economy.
This is really inspiring stuff.
Yeah.
It seems like there's so much creativity out there
There is.
when it comes to addressing gender inequality.
It's amazing what people are coming up with.
But, and I hate to bring this up,
Yeah.
we have to acknowledge that even with all these amazing initiatives,
Right.
progress can be slow. There's still real challenges out there.
Yeah, of course. We can't ignore that.
Pay gaps, underrepresentations in leadership,
Yeah.
harassment, discrimination.
These things are still happening. It's true.
And sometimes it could feel overwhelming, like, are we really making a
Yeah,
difference?
I get that feeling sometimes, too.
But I think the key takeaway here from all these examples
Okay.
is that change is possible.
It is.
And it's happening right now.
Every company, big or small, can play a part.
And it's not about waiting for someone else to lead.
Right.
It's about taking action, trying new things, learning from each other.
The more we share these stories of success, the more momentum we build for lasting change.
Speaking of sharing stories, there's one example from our research
Okay.
that I think really captures what we've been talking about.
I'd love to hear it.
So this company, they realized their parental leave policy was unintentionally biased.
How so?
It offered more time off for mothers than fathers,
Ah, I see.
which, kind of reinforces the stereotype that childcare is a woman's job.
Right. Even with good intentions, those policies can backfire.
Exactly. So they
Yes.
completely revamped the policy
Oh, wow.
to offer equal, generous leave to both parents.
That's a big change. What happened?
Well, there was some hesitation at first,
Yeah, I can imagine.
especially from the men. you know?
Mm.
Not sure about taking that much time off.
Right.
But the company really emphasized that they were serious about this. They encouraged the men to take the leave.
To take advantage of the policy.
Yeah, and it wasn't easy. It took time to shift those cultural norms.
But what was the outcome? Did it work?
It did. More men started taking leave, which had this ripple effect across the whole company.
What kind of ripple effect?
Well, it challenged those gender stereotypes.
Okay.
And it created a more equal division of labor at home.
So fathers were more involved with childcare.
Exactly. Which meant mothers could focus on their careers.
Without feeling like they were sacrificing their family.
Right. And it also had a positive impact on women's careers overall.
Oh, so.
They were no longer penalized for taking time off to have kids.
Ah, I see.
They could stay engaged in their work and advance at the same rate as the men.
That's amazing. It shows how important it is to think critically about those policies
Yeah.
and challenge those unconscious biases that can slip in.
It also shows that sometimes the simplest solutions are the best.
Yeah.
Equal parental leave.
It's fair. It makes sense.
And it creates a more just and equitable workplace for everyone.
It really does. Now, before we move on, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier
Okay.
about AI being used to combat bias. I think it would be helpful to explain a bit more about how that actually works.
Sure. Yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
So these AI tools, they analyze tons of data looking for patterns that might indicate bias.
So, for instance, if a company consistently promotes men over women,
Yeah,
even though they have similar qualifications,
the AI could flag that.
right, or if one department has way fewer women than others,
The AI could help investigate why.
that's like a detective for bias.
It really is. But we have to be realistic about the limitations of AI, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's not a magic solution.
Right.
It can help us see the problem more clearly, but it can't solve it on its own.
So we still need humans to make the decisions to take action.
Absolutely. AI is a tool. It's not a replacement for human judgment.
Right. We can't just outsource responsibility to machines.
Exactly. At the end of the day, it's up to us to create a more just and equitable world.
Well said. All right, I think it's time to move on to our final segment.
Sounds good.
We're going to talk about the role of government policy and something we haven't touched on yet. The crucial role men play as allies in this movement.
Looking forward to it.
Stay tuned. All right, welcome back to the deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground in this episode, from specific company initiatives to broader trends in Mexico.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating look at how CEDAW is actually playing out in the workplace.
And in this final part, we want to zoom out a bit, talk about the bigger picture.
The role of government policy.
And something we haven't really touched on yet.
Yeah.
The role men play as allies in this whole movement for gender equality.
That's an important one. Sometimes it feels like the conversation around gender equality leaves men out, you know?
Or makes them feel like they have to be super careful about what they say.
Exactly. But men are absolutely crucial to achieving real equality.
Right, you can't just be women pushing for change.
It has to be a collective effort, men and women working together.
Absolutely. So how can men be effective allies? What does that look like in practice?
Well, first and foremost, it's about listening to women, believing their experiences. Men need to educate themselves about the challenges women face, you know, both at work and in society.
Right.
And they need to be willing to challenge their own biases and assumptions.
Because we all have them.
We do, even if we're not aware of them.
It's like that saying, check your blind spots.
Exactly. Once you see those blind spots, then you can start to address them.
Okay, so how do they do that?
Well, men can use their positions, their platforms, to amplify women's voices, to advocate for policies that promote equality,
Yeah.
and this is important, hold other men accountable for sexist behavior.
Having those tough conversations.
It can be uncomfortable,
It can.
but it's necessary to shift the culture, you know?
Right, it's not enough to just not be part of the problem.
You have to be part of the solution.
And that includes being a champion for women's leadership, right?
Absolutely. Actively sponsoring and mentoring women, advocating for their promotions,
Okay.
helping create a work environment where women feel valued and respected and empowered to lead.
So it's about taking action, not just standing by.
Exactly. When men step up as allies like that, it makes the whole movement stronger, more inclusive.
Okay, so we've talked about men as allies. Now let's talk about the role of government.
Okay.
Governments have a big responsibility here, right?
Huge. They need to create laws and policies that support and enforce gender equality.
And not just pass laws, but actually make sure those laws are working.
Exactly. It's one thing to have a law on the books, but if it's not being implemented or enforced,
Right.
it's meaningless.
So we're talking about things like Strong anti-discrimination laws.
Yes, absolutely.
Paid parental leave for both parents.
That's crucial.
Affordable childcare.
And of course, protections against harassment and violence.
These are all essential, right?
They are. It's hard for companies to really embrace equality
Right.
if the system around them isn't designed to support it.
And when governments do take this seriously,
Yeah.
it sends a message
It does.
to everyone.
It says, we value gender equality, and we're willing to put our money where our mouth is.
Are there examples of policies that have been especially effective? Like, what's actually working out there?
One that comes to mind is quota systems.
Oh, like quotas for women on corporate boards or in government positions.
Exactly.
I know those can be controversial.
Hannah, yeah.
Some people say they're unfair, that they prioritize gender over qualifications.
But the data shows they work. Quotas have led to a significant increase in women leaders.
Interesting.
And once women are in those positions of power, they can make a real difference. They can influence policy, mentor other women, create a more inclusive culture.
So it's like a ripple effect.
Exactly. It's a powerful tool for breaking down those barriers and forcing people to confront their biases.
But I imagine there's pushback,
Right.
resistance to these kinds of policies.
There is, yeah. There are always political and cultural obstacles.
Right.
Some people argue that quotas are discriminatory or that they interfere with the free market. But sometimes you need these proactive measures to level the playing field to achieve true equality.
It's a reminder that progress isn't always easy, and it takes time and effort.
It does. But the good news is we are seeing a global shift toward greater gender equality.
That's good to hear.
And government policies are a big part of that change.
It feels like we're at a turning point
It does.
where the momentum for equality is really building.
I agree. But